Okay, well, wonderful. First of all, my name is Christine Kai. I am the strategic lead for the Division of Family Practice, but also the lead for facility engagements in our community, the Cathedral Regional District. And I'm calling to you from the traditional and treaty lands of the Klahaman people. And thanks everybody for attending our webinar and your willingness to present about your inpatient care model. Together with many other communities, we are really on a quest to developing a sustainable inpatient care model. And many of you are in the same boat and already are ahead of us or are just exactly where we are, but are thinking about different models or have tried different models. So I'm really pleased to have been able to bring you all together in this webinar so we can all hear from each other what kind of models you have and have tried or what you are thinking of in trying. For example, Cowichan is just launching into a new model. I want to do a special welcome to our local physicians who are making time to already be here. And I know many will watch this webinar later. I see Gareth and I see Barry, so it's wonderful to have you there. And then special welcome also to our VCH partners, Michelle and Rachel. We're really in the boat with the VCH to develop this model. So we're very pleased that we can walk alongside with them. And then last, of course, a very special welcome to our guests of 5 different communities, which I think is pretty special to have you here. We have people from Mission, Penticton, Saanich, Sechelt, and Cowichan. So the format will be as followed. I've provided everybody with a time slot. Say you have maximum of 15 minutes, which includes questions from the audience. And if you have any questions that aren't answered, I would say hold on to them. You can put them in the chat box or you can just write them down. Hopefully we have some time at the end of the webinar to answer some of those questions. And if not, please feel free to email them to me or put them in the chat and I will make sure to get an answer later to you. As with our other webinars, we will record this, we are recording this webinar and we will place the recording on our website, but we will also make a written summary and place that there as well, so that people can just, see what topic they want to see and then see what the answers we have for there. That's all the introduction I wanted to do. So I want to hand it over now to Manju and to Peter from Mission to talk about their model. And I know they have slides because Manju already tried that out. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Christian. So basically, I'm going to start my screen share now and pick that there and play. Okay. Hopefully you can see all that. So today I'm presenting with Dr. Peter Barnsdale. My name is Dr. Manju Bhatt, and we're presenting the patient model of care at Mission Memorial Hospital. Just one second here. I'm just gonna there we go. Okay. Next slide. Oh, how do I advance this here? Oh, there it is. It's the first time I'm doing this, so please bear with me. So we are also the Mission Memorial Hospital Medical Staff Association. And firstly, I'd like to begin with the land acknowledgement that the clinicians and staff of Mission Memorial Hospital Medical Staff Association acknowledge that we live and work on the unceded, traditional, and ancestral territories of the Stolo people, particularly the Skolets, Matskwi, Kwantlen, and Lekamel peoples. In terms of conflicts of interest, I'm not aware of any conflicts of interest between myself and Dr. Barnsdale for this talk. So who are we? Myself, I'm a GP in Mission. I work in the medical group, which is one of the large practices next door to Mission Oaks Hospital, Mission Oaks Medical Group, which Dr. Barnsdale works in. And I think between us, we have 10 physicians in each practice or more. And if you want to include nurse practitioners. And so I've been working in Mission since 12 years now. and I've worked as ER physician and hospitalist, and also done MRP in the past when we had the MRP system. And currently I'm the Mission Memorial Hospital MSA president. Dr. Barnsdale, he's a family physician who's been working in Mission for 20 years and has looked after inpatients at the hospital the entire time, spending 12 years working in Mission ER. He's been Doctors of BC and BCFD's board member in the past as well, and president of the BCFD's, or SGP as it's now known. He was on the GPSC for nearly 6 years and spent time on the original inpatient working group led by Darcy Ayres and Brian Winsby. He's also he's been regional department head of family practice for the Fraser Health for the past 10 years, and worked with many families, physicians, and looked at their struggles to maintain inpatient work, and also how they stepped away from it during that time. Of the 11 hospitals in Lower Mainland, 3 still have significant numbers of involved FPs providing care to their own inpatients, and those 2 do not have hospital services on site compared to 10 years ago. So thank you, Peter, for that detail. Mission Memorial Hospital is in the center of Mission. It's on a hill, and the Community Health Center and our medical group is very close to it. We have 30 medical inpatient beds and also 20 PATH unit beds. For those wondering what a PATH unit is, it's a patient assessment for transition to home, usually where people who, after say a hip operation or other medical acuity and let's say Abbotsford Hospital or sister hospital come over and they do further occupational therapy, physiotherapy treatments until they're fit for going home. Sometimes there are patients there waiting for long-term care placement or waiting for supports and other equipment to be put into their house before they can go home. When we're over capacity, we could be up to 34 inpatients on the medical side. We get our inpatients from the ER, but also we get transferred medical inpatients from Abbotsford Regional Hospital when they are less acute. We don't have ICU, we don't have all the specialties. We do have a visiting internal medicine service, and we have X-ray department, but we're waiting on the construction of a CT for our site. Pipe in, Peter, if you have anything else to add about Mission Hospital.
Sure. Thanks so much for the introduction, Manju. Yeah, I think the photo you shared of me is probably about the same age as the picture you've shared of the hospital there, which is quite a long time ago. So we're a small site, and as Manju says, we've got we've got an ER on site, and we have basic radiology and labs on site, which is how it's been for quite a few years now. The hospital used to have an ICU and pediatrics and obstetrics many years ago, and that all sort of got washed away when things transitioned into the health authority model at the turn of the century. So it's been a bit of a sort of a smaller unit in one sense since then, although the things like the PATH unit were a development sort of since thinking probably around about 2015 or 16 or something like that. Now, Manju, did you want to speak to the transitional bit? I want to make sure we're being relevant.
I've got quite a few slides yet, so I'm going to head motor on. I think, yeah, so let's move on to the next slide. So basically, before the hospital system, and correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, because I'm looking back into the past here, and I'm trying to get the history right, and nobody's been writing history books. So basically, before the hospital system, we had independent MRPs looking after their own inpatients. So people from Mission Oaks, that's where Peter's from, he'll be looking after individual doctors looking after individual inpatients, and then they'll be providing their own cover on the weekends for their own medical group, and we'll be providing our own medical group cover. For instance, if I was on call, I would be covering on Saturday and Sunday all of the medical group patients that would be there. So we also did cover unattached patients, and we were billing separately for those when it was more MRP led. We had call groups composed mainly of the 2 medical clinics, and then so basically I don't think there was very many. There were other doctors, independent practitioners from other smaller clinics who also had their own patients, and they pretty much were on the hook all the time, or maybe they asked us, I think, to cover them for the nights and the weekends.
Yeah, I mean, I think as most locations have found, it's an evolving thing. You know, when I first started working in Mission, you didn't see many unattached patients. I think without exception, we had everybody in the community with hospital privileges, and then it sort of started to drop off probably around 2006. We lost our first physician who basically decided he didn't want our privileges anymore. And from there, it sort of just cascaded down, you know, a slow collapse, but it did generally sort of collapse over the next 11 years.
So yeah, so basically then we had the doctor of the day system where, and also a doctor of the night. I don't know whether we actually had a doctor of the day system. I think you basically called the MRP who was on for that patient first before you would go to the doctor of the day. And then we had a transition at some point. I believe it was probably 2015 or something like that. I'm not sure, where the Clinic 1, that's Mission Oaks, it put Clinic 1, moved to population-based funding, and the majority no longer provided MRP care because of the need to focus on the care in the practice. So
that's 2017, and it took a little while for that to take place. So maybe it was 2018 when we started to get physicians dropping out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit of a period. In fact, some of the physicians like Peter and Fareed, they continued doing hospitalist service, later on. And then Clinic 2, that's our group, we continued to do our own MRP system where we had our own call group. But both clinics subsequently started to participate in hospitalist lines 1 and 2. And traditionally line 1 was Mission Oaks and line 2 was the medical group. And so it kind of continued until it kind of became irrelevant who the groups were. So eventually MRPs were dropping off gradually from our medical group. Didn't really want to continue doing hospitalists. And, you know, sometimes you have a situation where you're MRP for your patients and you're covering your group, and then you're also hospitalist 2 at the same time. So you would have to see those patients outside of your contracted hours for the hospitalist, technically. And that obviously creates trouble for people who really want to abide by that rule and not create a billing conflict. And so, yeah, you'd have to come in early and see your patients later. And you know, it's just difficult. So the medical group continued to round even through COVID while covering the other MRP patients. Obviously, if a patient's MRP no longer provided hospital service as an MRP, then what happened then was they would be unattached, as it were, when they came into the hospital system. They would be under hospitalist, period. So it came down to about 6 of us at the end, you know, and we tried to have meetings. We'd have meetings to meet, okay, how many? But I think 6 was kind of the critical mass we had to have to cover the nights and the weekends. Less than 6, which was January, I think, of this year. In fact, that's when we decided that we couldn't carry on anymore because 2 of the people didn't want to continue, and then we couldn't do it with 3 and 4 doctors being on call, 1 in 3, 1 in 4. So that's when it stopped. So when we're doing medical rounds, like kind of weekend rounds, I already described to you that 1 doctor will cover the whole medical group. The hospitalist lines 1 and 2, however, were covering full 7-day shifts. So basically, you'd be working from 8 till 6:30 generally, and then after that it would be the on-call, and you'd cover overnight. Now, when we were doing more MRPs, we had coverage from the divisions for funding the overnight cover. But then as that dwindled away and we stopped, then the division's money no longer came in. So then, you know, we had this different system where there's 2 different doctors a night, medical group patients and hospitalist patient, and then that also collapsed eventually. So the kind of issues we faced, let me just move this around here. You know, recruitment and retention, trying to get people to fill the hospitalist lines. And then because we additionally formed the PATH line, which was perpetually unfilled until lately, when we had more commitment from Dr. Barnsdale and also some other physicians pitching in. And Hospice 3 was formed later on because we wanted to cover, we had more volume became more sick patients on the ward, and we just had to make sure that the evenings, you'd be working all evening if you didn't have hospice 3. And also there was admissions and transfers coming in. So how do we deal with that? People from ER especially. We tried to arrange it so that transfers wouldn't come after 5, but sometimes that couldn't be helped. They were meant to come before 5 and they came after 5. And then you had to get them in because of the 10-hour rule. And that's something that we were trying to achieve. Obviously, there was the nurses failed to appreciate the family physician continuity. Of course, there was value to that, but as the acuity increased, it became apparent to most of us that really it was not sustainable for family doctors to cancel the whole clinic and be there the whole day. You just couldn't do it, and you're not remunerated that way for the fee for service, whereas the hospitalists were. So the hospice on site was very popular with the nursing staff. I already talked about billing dilemmas where you have to kind of ensure your billing is before and after your shift so that it's not conflicting with what the shift is paying you for through Fraser Health, and you're doing shadow billing while you're on shift, so that Fraser Health can claw back that money from the MSP. So when the night doctors no longer had divisions compensation for overnight, then basically they had to find other ways. And so we had this thing called OSF funding. I'm not really sure what that stands for, but it is through Fraser Health. And so you have to put in that you're spending time doing your billings, and then they'll pay you for that overnight. The other thing overnight is there is the residence at TRIN, which is the residence in Mission. Very interesting name. And they are a long-term care facility with, I believe, how many beds, Peter? Is it your RCP there? 400 beds or 200 beds?
It's 200.
200 beds, yeah. So you could be called about any of the patients there. So I think that's a little bit of a goodwill gesture from the hospitalist to cover that still. And of course, you know about hospitalist contract negotiations. I don't think I need to go into that particularly. There's a whole legal thing there, which is debatable. Now that we have the new payment model coming up. Hospitalists were the lone service providers for the inpatients from January this year. So line 1 would cover 9 to 11.5 hours, depending on whether or not there was path coverage. If there's path coverage for 5 hours during the day, and it has to be during the day so that the nursing staff can make planning decisions regarding those patients on the unit regarding placement or whatever it is they need. And then hospice 3 coverage was for the acute admissions. It's really an admissions line from 5 to 11. Mainly you'd position yourself in ER and try and get those admissions admitted to meet the 10-hour rule. And then overnight, you'd kind of rely on the goodwill of the ER doctor to just tell you about it in the morning. And then in the morning, whether you're line 1 or 2, you'd take that. So we take on turns being on call. Yeah, go ahead.
I assume people know what the 10-hour rule is.
Yeah, the 10-hour rule basically is the goal that you would have someone who is, when the decision to admit is taken from the ER, that they would be fully admitted within 10 hours and not left hanging. What could happen is the ER physician does the admission and then nobody's actually seen them from the hospital service, and then no care is taking place. So if from the ER admission to the, I think it actually starts when they actually enter ER and they're checked in. So from being checked in to being seen by the hospitalist admitting doctor, it has to be within 10 hours. It is not always met, but I think it's kind of, you want a large percentage of the admissions to meet that rule. In terms of on-call, the night doctor, we alternate between hospitalist 1 and 2, between the hours of 11 and 8. If you have to come in, you have to come in. So that's kind of the deal that, if the patient's going ill, you can't ask the ER doctor in the first instance. You can ask them to start doing things, but then you have to be there within, I think, 15 minutes or answer the phone within 15 minutes, and you have to be there within 45 minutes. Yeah. If you're at home, yeah. So that's the arrangement.
And I just answered to Graham. We're not on site. It's after 11 p.m. So the guy that's doing the H3 is there until 11, does the admissions, covers the ward, and then the person. And typically we are alternating between the two of us. The H1 and H2 to cover the nighttime for any phone calls, and very, very rarely have to go in.
We have this system whereby H1 is covering the even odd days, and the H2 is covering the even days. And also we have a system called Team Up, which we've used to make sure that everyone knows what who's on and for when, and you can plan ahead for the whole year. So you have people taking up irregular lines for entire weeks, say every month or every 2 weeks or every 2 months, or in some instances, you know, they can work whatever they want.
The important thing is there that we've taken over our own scheduling, and we manage that in-house, as it were, between the physicians. Yeah,
it used to be covered by the admin at our hospital, but it turned out that there was a lot of confusion, and this kind of transparent Team Up app where we can look at what's happening. For example, this week, Peter's, you can clearly see he's got a blue line there covering the whole week, and then he's got another colleague there covering the hospice 2 shifts, and the hospice 3 shifts all filled. And yeah, it's been a very good thing. It's not, scheduling itself cannot be funded by facility engagement, but the work that went into arranging and exploring systems we could support. So yeah, but the actual scheduling is part of our job, and so it's not funded.
Thanks.
So,
sorry, I'm just looking at the time.
Yes.
Thanks so much, Manju and Peter, for presenting. If there are any other questions, please hold on to them. Maybe we have some time at the end, but I want to make sure others have sufficient time for their presentation as well. I want to hand it over now to Penticton. And Manju, can you stop sharing your screen? I don't know if they have slides to share, but then they can take over.
Hi, my name is Tiffany Bursey. I'm a family doc that works in Penticton, and I'm also the CIS inpatient lead, and CIS is our community inpatient service, aka our GP hospitalist model that we work in at Penticton Hospital. And I am co-presenting with Julie. Julie, I'll let you introduce yourself because I think you're first.
Unmute myself. Hi, I am Julie Young. I'm Member Services Manager at the South Okanagan Similkameen Division of Family Practice. And we're going to tell you a little bit about our model of care at Penticton Regional Hospital, which is the largest hospital in our division catchment area. The story, I'm just going to whip through a few slides really quickly, and the story will sound very familiar to you. Our Penticton, Summerland are the largest communities that feed into Penticton Regional Hospital. Together, they have a population of about 65,000 people. At the time the program started, Penticton Hospital had 143 inpatient beds. And at that time, we had a community number of physicians in community who were approaching retirement age. We had 54 physicians at that time working in community and mostly in hospital as well. We have an older than average physician community, I would say. Median age right now is 55. At that time in 2017, a number of the older physicians in solo and very small practices had to retire without replacement, which created a large volume of unattached patients. And in our model, all of the community physicians pitched in. They looked after their own inpatients during the day, and they pitched in to be the doctor of the day on a rotating basis. And any unattached patients were attached to the doctor of the day on the date of admission, and the DOD would follow them until discharge. So as you can imagine, the volume of unattached patients became quite large as more and more physicians retired, and some gave up privileges. And it came to a breaking point in 2017 when the Doctor of the Day program was under threat. So our goal, working with a number of partners, was to retain GP inpatient care, maintain the culture of everybody pitches in and helps out the community, and maintain the call group, maintain continuity of care for the patients, but to address that issue of the burden of the unassigned inpatients. So our process was that we engaged extensively, obviously, with our own members, our community GPs, with the health authority to understand their needs, and with Darcy Ayres at GPSC, and also with divisions in our area that had transitioned in recent years to hospitalist models to learn the pitfalls and benefits, to get some honest insight into their experience. And we learned from that latter group, the other communities, that transitioning into a full hospitalist model had some detrimental effects on their community GPs. A number had experienced community GPs closing their practices to go and work in the hospitalist model. And it created a lot of division among the two groups, the hospitalist versus community GP. And there was a lot of sort of disconnect, which obviously doesn't do much for continuity of care for patients, among other things. Anyway, cutting a long story short, in 2018, April 1st, haha, no joke, we launched the new inpatient model. And it's a sort of two-armed model. And Tiffany, I'm going to hand over to you in a sec, but basically we have the community family physicians who still want to do inpatient work. And then we have a team led by Tiffany who look after the unattached inpatients. Tiffany, over to you.
Yeah, so basically the community inpatient service is a group of family docs, and all of us are family docs and love that we are family docs that basically take care of all the unattached patients. And so there's many who don't have family doctors and truly are unattached. And then there's a lot of people who are actually attached and just come from our outside communities, such as Oliver or Karamias or Princeton, just because we are a bigger hospital and have more services. So sometimes we take care of other smaller communities in the South Okanagan's patients as well. And even though they're attached to GPs, they just don't have GPs that come to our hospital. So currently we have 4 lines that take care of all these unattached patients. And in January, we'll be growing our program to 6 lines as more and more family docs move out of hospital. And basically we cover from 7 a.m. until 5 o'clock every day of the year. And we mimic and work alongside our family docs that still have privileges and take care of their own patients in hospital. On the weekends, the community family doctors only cover their patients from 7 a.m. until noon. And then the rest of the evenings and the afternoon on weekends is covered by our doctor of the day. So our doctor of the day is a family doctor that takes care of all the GP patients in hospital, the CIS and community family docs patients, and basically round at night do ward issues. We do not do admissions overnight. We just hand them over to the appropriate person in the morning. But our ED physicians are pretty amazing and they do really solid admitting orders for us. So we're very fortunate to have that relationship with them. And so I guess next slide, Julie. Oh, I must add, also our doctor of the day, just like the other community, takes care of our long-term care patients as well. So we have, I don't know, 4 or 5,
seven facilities between Penticton and Summerland.
And Summerland, yeah, that's true. So we have lots of, so we take care of the long-term care calls as well in the evenings and in the afternoons on weekends. It's not that cumbersome, to be honest. It's very rarely that you have to actually go in and do anything. And most of the time it's just phone call things that we can deal with. So, and it's nice to be part of that community as well. So next slide. Yeah, that one. Our 4 different lines currently, we have a 7 to 3 shift, and the first line starts at 7 so that they can get handover from the DOD, and then they actually use a workload calculator to basically ensure that all 4 lines have reasonably even workloads. So they divvy up the admissions, and then if there's any issues that you're called about in that first hour on someone else's team, then they manage that as well. And then a CIS 2 line is from 9 until 5. And so the last couple hours of their shift from 3 until 5, they're covering all the phone calls, because any admissions throughout the day, any transfers from other hospitals, we just always direct them to CIS1, and switchboard knows that, so that they sort of manage who's next in line for the admission and whatnot. And then after 3 o'clock, CIS takes the last 2 hours and then covers any sort of ward issues if the rest of the docs have left. And then 3 and 4 are 8 to 4, and their special tasks are to review all the labs. So anything that we order in hospital, imaging or blood work, comes back to us, whether they're in hospital or not. If they're in hospital, we just sort of file them. But if they've already been discharged, then we still review those and manage them. And so 3 and 4 take care of that role. And then 5 and 6, that'll be starting in January. We sort of started one kind of like a 7:30 to 3:30, and one I think we've decided 8:30 to 4:30, just for a little bit more overlap in the morning and the afternoon. And they currently don't have any unique roles, but we haven't some ideas for them, but we haven't officially made that. So maybe the next slide. So yeah, this is just the physician lead is a compensated role, and I don't even know how much I get paid. Julie probably could chime in about that, but I think, what is it, an hour or something like that
I think it's an hour a
like
week.
There you go. And then scheduling lead, probably something similar, I'm guessing, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And then we've also created 2 new leadership roles this year. One is the residency program liaison, just because we have a lot of residents that come through. And so in terms of scheduling them and ensuring their evaluations get done, that person is not paid. Maybe I should share some of my pay with them now that you throw that in that slide. And then we also have a QI lead, which is a brand new role. So we're really excited to hopefully do a project together every sort of term. And that is not compensated through our CIS, but through MSA, there's lots of opportunity to get funding for the projects. So yeah, next slide. I think that's still me. This slide. So back when just before we started in March 2018, or I guess at the very beginning, I should say, when we started in 2018, but we only had 2 lines. And so obviously you can see over the last couple of years, we've grown to 4 lines, and very quickly we're going to be growing to 6 lines in January. And then CIS patients that we managed each day at the very beginning was like 25, and Julie, you've written 75, but I feel like with 4 lines, that's what we're managing currently. So with all the GPs
I looked at the
scheduled,
calculator today, and we're already there. So I don't know what January is going to bring, Tiffany.
Because January, there's a lot of docs that'll be bowing out, and pretty sure that number will be closer to 100. And then number of contracted docs, when they first started, there was just two people, and now we're a team of 20 and still hiring. So if you know anyone that wants to come to Penticton, please get them in contact with me. Side note. And then what's really cool is that that's brought 16, well, more than that, new docs to our community. And what's really cool is that when we're not on CIS, we do 7 days in a row. When we're not on CIS, then we're doing other things, which is the next point. Only 2 of us are full FTEs, which is 24 weeks a year. And then everyone else is like anywhere between a 0.25 and a 0.75 FTE, which leaves lots of room for them to do other family practice things in our community. So we've got team members doing everything from GP oncology to emerge to mental health to women's health to, oh gosh, I feel like I'm missing a whole wackadoodle stuff. And then most importantly, just locuming in our community and relieving our family doc friends. And then, like I mentioned before, we do take a lot of residents. And so we started with none, and we're gone through 24 already. So that's kind of cool. And I think the next slide is you, Julie.
It is. So thanks, Tiffany. As I said previously, when we started this, we had 54 physicians working longitudinal care in the 2 communities. By January, we will have 49, but the bigger story is how few of them will retain privileges by that point. Having said that, the ones that are retaining privileges are very keen to stay in hospital. They're very committed to participating in this, and that's our next body of work, is to support that. We still have a committed group of people working in various after hours services, the doctor of the day, maternity call, or emergency call. And most importantly, we had no community GPs close a practice to work in our program. We did have a few, I think 3 physicians who retired from longitudinal care who have since taken on very part-time roles in our inpatient service, but none of them closed a practice and orphaned their patients to do so. They were retiring anyway, and happily we were able to find replacements for them and maintain that care for their patients.
And may I just throw in that we actually acquired a family doc who opened or joined a group to have a longitudinal practice. I saw that question in the chat. Currently, we only have 1 left that has a longitudinal practice.
Sorry, I can't monitor the chat and talk as well. So if there's anything pressing, we'll get to it.
So the other question,
2 slides.
That's the other quick question they just threw in there was, is there any obligations for new people joining CIS to provide locum coverage in the community? Well, not obligation, not in our contract, but part of our contract is that you have to keep your family practice license, which means you have to do 24 weeks over 3 years by college requirements anyways. And so generally people fulfill that in our South Okanagan community anyways.
Yeah. So you're wondering how we pay for it all. So that this service the program is managed by the division. We fund it through a variety, largely GPSC incentives and MSP billings. Tiffany did mention that our Doctor of the Day service does respond to long-term care calls after hours. And that is funded partly through the GPSC Long-Term Care Initiative. So some of their funding, we have a very robust long-term care program in our communities, and they generously contribute some of their funding to our Doctor of the Day call service so that they can meet their 24/7, 365 obligation to respond to long-term care. And of course, we're one of those communities that has received GPSC bridge funding for the last few years. And then MSP billings, the division has billing staff who do all the billings for the community inpatient service. And we are maintaining close to a 90% cost recovery on the billings for the physician expenses. And I think the physician expenses or expenses in general are pretty straightforward. Having said that, the division retains a contingency of about 5 to 10% of revenue for every program that we manage. That is a directive from our board of directors. And we are projecting that for next year, with growing the service to 6 CIS physicians and also trying to address some funding gaps that have become quite apparent. One is our CIS team is not compensated on par with hospitalist services in other communities near us, like Kelowna. So that's one disparity that needs to be addressed. The other is those core community GPs who want to stay in hospital. They don't make nearly as much money for doing their inpatient work as a CIS team. So if we're going to support them to stay in hospital, we have to bring them into line with what their colleagues are earning. So if we are to address those, we're going to have a deficit. And so the next step for us, we're working on it right at the moment, is to address that funding gap. And currently our health authority doesn't contribute anything to the inpatient services. So we are going to be looking to them to try and get them to support the service. And there's lots of reasons why they would want to do that. It's quite cost effective, and there's not exactly.
And I'm sorry to cut you off, Julie,
yeah.
but we're really at the end of time. So
yeah.
Could you wrap up and then we can.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's it. Any questions?
I would say people keep your questions. Maybe we have some time at the end, and otherwise we will put them in the chat and see if we can answer them as they come.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just put my email in the chat, and if anyone has any questions, you can reach out to me as well.
Wonderful.
And,
thanks,
yeah.
Tiffany. Okay, then I would like to hand it over to Saanich, to Dr. Andrew Kwasnica.
Hello, how's the audio?
Wonderful.
Oh, good.
Uh,
I'm walking my dog right now. She's a good girl. Anyway, Andrew Kwasnica here. I'm a family doctor on the Saanich Peninsula in Sydney, which is north of Victoria, and I work at Saanich Peninsula Hospital, which serves Saanich Peninsula and the Gulf Islands. And there I'm the head of, what am I called? I don't know. Division head of family practice and family practice lead for GO3 in Island Health, which I think represents those communities, but I'm actually not sure. We have what we also refer to as a Doctor of the Day program, which has been running, I think, since there were horse-drawn carriages. I'm not really sure exactly the details. I've been there since 2016, at which time the program itself was failing, mostly because of the doctors giving up their practices, and the age here of the average doctor at the time was similar. It was 55 or something, and so there were all kinds of problems like that. And it has been revitalized in large part just by aggressive recruitment and retention. And we're also very lucky to have a Saanich Peninsula Hospital and Community Health Foundation. And apparently there's a whole bunch of rich farmers around here. So it actually generates a whole bunch of money every year to sustain the hospital and community. In fact, so things have grown significantly. When I joined, there was 2 Doctor of the Day groups and 1 other small group that participated minimally in that. And now there's 4 full-size groups and that 1 extra group still. The San Pen is a 65 acute care bed hospital which usually runs over capacity by about 40%, which is not good because we don't have any extra doctors. And it's got a 14-bed ER, which also runs more like 19 patients at a time. And we have a 12-bed palliative care unit. And then we also have on the site, we have a pretty large extended care unit for long-term care. The Doctor of the Day program has these 4 groups that I mentioned, and it is funded by MSP Billings, number 1, number 2, GPSC funding, also with bridge funding for the past several years, which is now going until March of 2024, after some strong words were shared. And it runs very well. The doctors are expected to be available between 7 a.m. and usually about 11 p.m. So depending on how things are going, that could be on site. However, there are call-out fees that can be done for if you're going back in the evening or weekends. Overnight is covered by the ER doctor if there are any acute issues, and they share some of the GPSC stipends that go to them for each nightly shift of theirs. The admissions and discharges are also topped up by GPSC funds. So that's MSP billing plus $250 for an attached admission. I'll explain what that means in a sec because it's a bit funny where I come from. $150 or $100 for unattached, and then $40 for discharge. And then we also spread out the GPSC funding in something that we call triple delivery, which matches the $14,086, which is $2,100 quarterly. And that is prorated for doctors who participate in more of a hard called setup. So the DoD program is run by a total of about 42, I just did a count, 42 physicians, about half are locums. And of that total group, about 19 or so have their own practices and do either full-time coverage of their own patients or defer to the DoD group and therefore give up some of their GPSC quarterly stipend and do more hard call fashion on a prorated basis. What else can I tell you? We have further incentivized the works. Part of our issue is that the same locums that work in our hospital are the ones that we rely on to cover us in the community. For those of us who do DoD with practices, and the frequency is about 1 in 8 to 1 in 6 weeks. So it's like sort of 6 to 8 weeks of the year on for 7 days at a time. So to incentivize community practice, so we're not losing all the locums to the hospital, there's a couple things that we're doing. One is brand new that we'll be offering to them. But when we do the scheduling, and we have a sort of hardcore group of representatives, one from each of these DoD groups to do the scheduling and workforce planning. We have to meet twice a year for that, or over the course of several meetings. The locums who agree to work in the community for X number of weeks for a community physician who is attached to the hospital and therefore who does work at the hospital will get prioritized for scheduling of the extra DoD weeks. And of course, we have ample work. So ultimately, pretty much everyone gets what they ask for. But for those who are interested in working more, they therefore have to work more in the community to get prioritization for those weeks. And that has worked out very well. The next thing to butter up the deal is that the hospital's foundation has approached us because apparently they had too much money to work with. So they've asked us how we should use it. And we are creating some locum retention bonuses for 2-year contracts to incentivize work both in the community and at the hospital, so that people have to commit to a certain number of weeks in the community and be available for what usually amounts to about a 1 in 6 scheduling in the hospital. So like a big part of what's kept our hospital alive with using community doctors and not having to resort to any sort of hospitalist system is number one, politics, which always drove a wedge in it anyway. Number two, the health authority apparently was more inclined to let the hospital die than it was to create a hospitalist service, which is fascinating because of the number of beds that it really does in the community has to serve. And the ability to, I guess, to regroup and incentivize it to keep it afloat. So that is where we're at. But I gotta say, like, I don't think it would continue to exist without the support of that foundation and some very dedicated people on the ground. Some of the older physicians have stuck around after retirement to work with the foundation and continue the programs that they're supporting. Quite fascinating. So we have a horseshoe up our butt here. We're very lucky to have that, because I think this all would have crashed and burned many years ago without them. I hope that explains our system. I don't think I have anything else to add right now.
Thanks, Andrew. Are there any questions for Andrew and the Saanich model?
I just clarify, Andrew, when you're referring to DoD groups, it's actually, are you talking about a weekly coverage?
Yeah, the DoD groups are a weekly coverage, and in each of those groups, there's a core group of sort of between 5 and 7 community doctors, and then all the extra weeks that need to be covered are covered by locum physicians. It starts at basically 8 a.m. on Monday and goes to the next Monday at 8 a.m. We do handover on Sundays.
And could you clarify, out of your hospital bed base, about what % are covered by these 4 DoD lines, and how many are covered by their own MRP, like GP as MRP?
Yeah, that's a good question. So during the week, Monday to Friday, the attached doctors would follow their own. That makes up very much a small minority of all of those beds, maybe 10 or 15. On the weekends, those same attached MRPs will decant their patients to their respective DoD groups. And any new admission on the weekends, except for one group, which is that sort of 5th small DoD group, any attached admission actually just goes to the next DoD on the rota. We used to have it so that an attached admission would go to the same colored group that physician was in. However, some of the groups just have it so that they would get way too many attached admissions. So now it just goes to the DoD group proper. Half the time anyway, it's a locum, so it doesn't really matter for continuity of care or being in the same clinic and that kind of thing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess I was just puzzled because when you were talking about some of the incentives, like you said, 250 for attached admission and 100 for an unattached admission. And I was curious, is that just one way that you're trying to incentivize people to continue doing that primary care full service work?
Not really. It's actually because there is already an MSP bonus for an unattached patient to the tune of $150. So it's only $106 or $103 to do an admission. If it's an unattached patient, it's a $150 bonus. Top that up by 100, and then if it's an attached patient, we do that actually to equalize, and so to not disincentivize locums doing attached work in the hospital on our behalf.
Okay, super.
For example,
Thanks.
weekends.
That's
Yeah.
great clarification. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew, it's David May here from Pal River. Do you feel that this model is sustainable?
Good question. And it's only as sustainable as there are dollars What the foundation supplies is definitely a smaller part of how this has been kept alive, but it's been integral because, you know, they've come up with incentives for new doctors to take on practices and that kind of thing. So that part's been really important for recruitment and retention, I guess, but the ongoing program itself would not exist without the GPSC funding. So same thing, it's the bridge funding, it's the, you know, playing chicken with them in the past few years on an ongoing basis, and some very strict memorandums of understanding that are interesting. But how sustainable is it? Like I say, it's the dollars. So if the GPSC, like they turn other funding into MSP stuff, if that doesn't happen here, then no, the program will crash and burn. My understanding is that our local health authority, Island Health, was apparently going to be willing to somehow foot the bill if GPSC backed out this year. So apparently the game of chicken was not so much between us and them, it was between the health authority and GPSC, but that's the base level of my understanding. So no, highly fickle, I would say.
Thanks, Andrew. Last chance for any questions for Andrew.
Andrew, it's Graham up in Duncan.
Hello, Graham.
Hello, thank you. Do individuals bill themselves, or is billing pooled, or like how do you work out the
Yeah,
MSP?
it is not at all pooled, which is sort of interesting too. Yeah, so there's no pooling. It's all just, yeah, the work you do, the MSP billing, and then the extra incentives that are sort of per patient essentially. And so it can be very much hit and miss, because there are some weeks where the number of admissions are very high, the number of discharges are high, the inpatient load is huge, and then other weeks not so much. So it's generally within the 4 groups on a given week, it's going to be fairly equal, very little disparity, but week to week it could be highly variable. And unfortunately, we can't plan for that. So for someone like me, I'd love to be able to book some clinics or something on my DoD weeks, but there's just no way I could rely on that time. But yeah, when you're there at the same time as somebody else, it's generally pretty equal. That would be a fascinating and very onerous task to spread it out across the year. That'd be fun though.
Thanks. Again, thanks, Andrew. And if you have any more questions, put them in the chat or hold on to them and email them to me later, and I will get you an answer. I want to hand it over now to Karin and Annette from Sechelt.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Annette McCall. I'm a family physician here in Sechelt in Gibsons. And Karin Forgie. Unfortunately, neither Karin nor I have any slides. So we're going to just step into the footsteps of Andrew and just try to wing it. So Karin, if I'm making mistakes with numbers, as you know, I'm not entirely crisp with numbers, please correct me. Okay. All right. So we have a community hospital in Sechelt, and we have on a given day somewhere between 40 and 50 inpatients. We have a CCU and an inpatient psychiatry unit. We have an emergency room. We have obstetrics, and we have surgical services here as well. In terms of specialists, we have internal medicine on 24/7, surgery, obstetrics, and psychiatry limited to Monday to Friday or Monday to Thursday. So not entirely robust right now. And the Sunshine Coast has always been a GP-run medical community. And the term full service family physician has been here right from the get-go. I've been here only for 3 years. I've been in other places, Nanaimo, North Shore, and I've been a hospitalist at Lionsgate Hospital. So I have some perspectives from other places. And I've come to the Sunshine Coast to some degree, and a big degree, because I love being a full service family physician, and I love hospital medicine and community medicine. So I think that's probably what many of us are saying, and that's why we're here. But like any other community, we have seen an attrition of physicians and an increase in unattached patients and grappling with the same problems that everybody else is. So right now, we probably have a quarter of our inpatients who are unattached. And for that system, we have a list of all of us, and it's not a doctor of the day. It's sort of a patient at a time attached to the next physician on the list. So we're not overwhelmed with 6 new patients that we haven't known before, and that appears to be sustainable. In terms of what our 44 family physicians do in the community and for the hospital, has been sort of the ask is that everybody who has a longitudinal practice needs to do something in the hospital. And so the something is sort of shared between obstetrics, anesthesia, emerge, and inpatient rounding. And right now we have less than a quarter of our family physician body signed up for inpatient rounding. So we actually have right now 10 or 11 family physicians who do this work. And we carry the inpatient the inpatient work on weekdays between 5 and 10 at night. And on weekends and statutory holidays, again, from sort of 7, 8 in the morning until Monday morning. And the emerge physicians will take first call for the overnight. So most of the time we don't get called out. So most of the time it works well. So the emerge docs do the 10 o'clock at night until 7 in the morning. And so in terms of sustainability, if we sort of look at us 10 and 2 of them were to say, well, we are no longer wanting to do this, we're really sort of scratching the surface of unsustainability because we just don't have enough bodies. Our funding model is what other people have said as well. It is MSP, and thanks to bridge funding, which we're just really at the beginning of our bridge funding. We've only had bridge funding since April 1st, which is helping some, but compared to everything else, it's really poorly paid work. And to some degree, it's, I can speak for myself. I haven't done emerge for a long time, so coming to this community, tried emerge, but there's a big steep learning curve and I sort of dropped that. Obstetrics, the same thing, anesthesia, the same thing. So we're sort of, to some degree, unless we're really keen to do obstetrics, we're trained to do anesthesia, or we really love emerge, we're sort of in this group. And when I look around with our group, we're not enthusiasts right now. And so coming back to sort of sustainability, we're doing it because we're doing the right thing for the community, not because we just love being the inpatient rounding group. And so we've been looking,
Good girl.
Sorry. I'm really excited to hear everybody else's models. I do know the model for the big city in terms of hospitalists. And we're definitely looking at solutions to, I guess, negotiate with our health authority to see if we can have some sessional funding for the weekend work and the evening work. And we're also right now looking at trying to get some sessional funding for our admissions. So this hospital at Sechelt, the emerge docs are doing the admissions. And right now with Cerner, the admissions can take an hour to an hour and a half. Like, it's very tedious, it's long, it's complicated, and the emerge is full. So there is a difficulty sort of meeting the needs for good admissions from the emerge docs. And so we're trying to figure out if we can have a independent hospitalist paid position during the week to do admissions, and also to look after patients who may crash in the daytime or in the evening on the ward when everybody else is in the office. Like, for me, it's it's 25, 30 minutes to get back to the hospital, busy days, we all know it. So going back and forth is not easy. And so we're trying to negotiate with our health authority to see if we can have a blended model. And the beginning of this model would be to have a sessionally paid, funded by the health authority position to be either a inpatient rounding physician or an emerge physician to do the admissions in the day. And then if that works, basically asking, can we have a blended model and get, for the weekends, can get sessional funding on par with hospitalists at VCH like Lionsgate. And with that, we would be able to potentially attract locums. Right now, for this second call inpatient rounding, there isn't anybody who's signing up to say, I want to do that for a weekend. And so, yeah, I think that's sort of our model. The funding, we're getting some money also from our complex care longitude, from our nursing home fund. So we're giving a little bit of money for that, but it's really not very much. The billing is, every physician who sees a patient, bills for that MSP wise through our offices. So we don't have a division involvement with billing for that. And I think that sort of wraps up our current state of affairs here in Sechelt.
Thanks, Annette. And Karin, anything to add?
No, I think she did catch pretty much everything. The only sort of just qualifier about the weekend rounding is we have 2 docs that round on the weekend to cover roughly 50 patients with always overflow. We have between 1 and 11 people admitted to our 11-bed emerge unit on any given day. And so those are also part of the ones that we do. We also have just an extra little bit of funding that goes to one of those 2 rounding physicians who deals with the psych inpatient unit. We have a small little 1-hour stipend that they get paid for. And if they spend more than an hour on the unit, rather than bill actually fee for service for those patients, because you end up, the psych inpatient ones are really well covered by psychiatry. And so we end up only being able to bill supportive care rather than take that away from the family doc who's doing the Monday to Friday work. We have this additional funding. And so there's 2 additional fundings, one for an hour, and anything above the hour, you can also bill for that. So it's a little bit of extra stuff that helps out, but it's all a little bit of piecemeal. Thanks. For sure.
And I see, Maki, you had a question for Annette, like typically how long are the physicians in to round in the morning?
So we have, now that we have Cerner, I actually looked at some numbers, and we have anything from 0 to 10 inpatients per physician. And the average is probably about 4. So it's probably about, an hour. But we do have, at my clinic, at Gibson's Medical Clinic, we have a buddy system. So oftentimes there are 2 physicians who cover each other so that we do a week on and a week off. And so it can be up to 6 or 8. So it's 2 to 3 hours in the morning. And then, of course, all through the day as well for that group. But I have had 10 patients in, just for about 2 months. The number was just, and it was not sustainable. The interruptions with those sick people, they were not all sick, but the number is too high to have a fully booked office. And so I think we're bumping up against the unsustainability piece.
Mm-hmm. And Annette and I are 2 of the ones that have the most. I mean, she's out beating me now, but out of the number of us, there's 3 or 4 of us that have a higher volume of inpatients at any given time.
Thanks. Okay, well, thank you so much. If you have any more questions, put them in the chat or hold on to them or email them to me later. And I want to hand it over now to the last presenters, which will be Maki and Graham and Rory from Cowichan.
Hi, well, good evening, everyone. My name is Rory Allen. I'm a project manager. Actually, I was hired by the Cowichan Division of Family Practice to do a review of the inpatient model at Cowichan District Hospital. We did that over the summer. And yes, I'm joined by Dr. Maki Kimura and Dr. Graham Blackburn, who are both GPs in the community, but also hold administrative roles. Maki is the medical director for the Cowichan region through Island Health, and Graham Blackburn is the head of the Department of Family Practice and the site chief at Cowichan District Hospital. So they were both on the steering committee for the project. So I'll talk a little bit about the process of, because we're looking at the sustainability of the model that we have in Cowichan, and then Graham and Maki can speak a little bit to kind of where we landed and ultimately the next steps that we have planned within the Cowichan Valley. So unlike some of the other presenters, I unfortunately do have slides. So I will bring them back up, and hopefully I'll blow through them pretty quickly here, and we can get on to questions if need be. So just for a little bit of context, so for those that I think probably most people know, Cowichan District Hospital's in Duncan on Vancouver Island. So we're about an hour north of Victoria, about 40 minutes south of Nanaimo. And the hospital is a community hospital that serves the Cowichan Valley. So a growing and aging community of about 90,000, a little over 90,000 people. So the hospital has 148 beds funded right now, although we typically have 160 to 170 or more patients in the building at any given time because we're chronically over capacity. And we are in the process of replacing the hospital. There's a new site that's been identified, and a plan has been approved by the provincial government to build a new hospital in Duncan. But that's a few years off, and so we're still kind of managing the current model that we have right now. And what I have on screen here is just a kind of a diagram that describes the medical model, how we manage the inpatient beds at CDH. And honestly, it's similar, I think, to some of the things that you've seen and heard from the other communities. So we have kind of a blended model. There are still family practitioners who are MRP for their own patients. This is about 60% roughly, give or take, given on the month, of the inpatients are covered by their own, medical inpatients are covered by their own GPs who come in and provide service. And then there's also a Doctor of the Day program, which is, I think, kind of similar to Annette, what you were describing, where it's not truly a doctor of the day, it's more of a rotation where a new unattached inpatient that comes gets assigned to the doctor on the DOD list, and then the doctor's name goes to the bottom, and the next unassigned patient goes to the next doctor. And then just as this model was a little bit, the Doctor of Day has been in place for a number of years, but it's with dwindling numbers of doctors participating in the Doctor of the Day and increased unattached or unassigned patients coming to the hospital. In 2020, we also introduced the unit, which is the unattached inpatient team, which kind of operates similar to a couple of other programs I think we've already heard about tonight, where physicians sign up for a week of service, typically about a week, and they manage unattached inpatients, and they usually go for the most of the day and take a full load of patients. And the Doctor of the Day and the unit teams kind of split the unattached. So, unattached patient A of the day goes to Doctor of the Day, unattached patient B goes to unit, and back and forth. And they tend to kind of share that workload. So this program has, or these programs, I really should say, are, they have been able to kind of manage the workload at the hospital. It has been challenging, and poor Graham has to constantly be sending out emails about trying to get people to sign up for shifts on the unit or to participate in the Doctor of the Day, and even just keeping people having their privileges. So it's challenging. It's kind of I think one person described it as it's constantly precarious. You know, we kind of get by month to month, but we never really have a stable model in Cowichan. And I think that's, you know, kind of a similar story in a number of communities. So that's why I was hired to lead the review. And I won't get into all the details because I could go on and on and on about the process and all that kind of stuff. So I'll try to keep it really high level. But essentially, we just wanted to look at what's the current state, how do these programs work, how are they funded, what are we using all of the incentives and different pieces to fund inpatient care at Cowichan District Hospital. There's a really big engagement component. We, especially with the family practice physicians in the community, try to reach out and connect with as many as possible, whether they're currently providing inpatient care or not participating in inpatient care, just to talk about the hospital and the current model and what could be done in the future. Connected with a number of other communities in BC, including a few of the people who are on this call, and just to learn what other communities are doing and to hear if there's any bright ideas. And there's some really interesting things going on in other places. So we tried to borrow some ideas from there and ultimately provide some recommendations. And we looked at a few different options for how could we improve things, you know, looking at some of the small kind of nuts and bolts. You know, could we make communication a little bit more streamlined? Could we make it a little bit easier for people to get into, or physicians to get in to provide care in the hospital, right up to more transformative kind of models for the hospital. So I won't go into all of the options, although happy to you know, provide the slides or I did produce a report for the division that I think we've been able to share with other divisions, so we could probably share those details if you're interested. But mainly, I just wanted to focus on the main option that we landed on and the one that we're kind of recommending the community go forward. And I know this is a lot to sort of take in on the slide at once. I think it's going to be very familiar though as you get into it, because it's essentially just a shared coverage model. We're recommending for the future, and maybe taking steps to get there, not all at once, is to shift to having kind of shared coverage groups that come together that provide inpatient care to kind of set numbers of inpatients in the hospital. And we're setting those at about 15 patients, because that's about the same load of inpatients that hospitalists in Nanaimo and Victoria tend to take on average. And expecting that community physicians would come together into a shared coverage group and then decide how to provide that inpatient care to those 15 inpatients. So, you know, kind of like we informally talked about in some of the other communities, and I think some in Cowichan already do this, that they can share that coverage back and forth, have one person go in for a week and provide that care like a hospitalist, or split that between a couple of people. And essentially get paid a daily stipend for that work of 15 inpatients. That could then be split by however many people actually go in and provide that care. And then the key to this would be ensuring that the attached patients for that coverage group would be attached within the patients that physician is going in to see. And then it would be topped up to 15 if it's not already at 15 inpatients with unattached patients. So you kind of spread that unattached or unassigned patient load across the hospital, and leave lots of flexibility for different teams to kind of self-organize the way that they choose. So put these little dotted lines around the physician icons to kind of show, like, you might have groups where they nominate one person to go in, and like I say, you may split that between 3 or have a whole bunch that all just go see 1 or 2 patients. But this would be supplemented by a nighttime call program, not unlike MOCAP, although it would be funded slightly differently, just to take pressure, because right now there's no kind of night call program in Cowichan, and just to take kind of some of the pressure off of the physicians, and then to have an admissions coordinator, someone to help allocate patients across all these different groups, and maybe do some of the unattached admissions, because as others have said, that can be a really time-consuming part. So ultimately, this was what was recommended to the community, and maybe at this point, I'll kind of pass it on to Mackie and Graham to speak a bit more about how that's landed and kind of what the next steps are in taking that forward.
Graham, do you want to go first?
Doesn't matter. I don't have a lot more to add. I think Roy summed it up well. It's precarious with a large hospital and many primary care physicians really maxed out and demands going up for inpatient care. So it's challenging for people to run offices and continue inpatient care. Yeah, I think what's also challenging for us is that we have basically these three systems, and that just makes it difficult to put a lot of effort behind one or two that would probably be more sustainable if we had buy-in. But because we're such a large community, we have the problem that there's still 50 odd family doctors that want to come and see their own inpatients. Which I think is a great problem to have. However, the load of patients that are not seen by them keeps going up, and then we're struggling to keep up with that. So that's probably all I would say. No other great details.
I'd add that where we're at right now, we're still a little bit ungelled, I guess. Rory did a phenomenal job of gathering all this information and produced a really big report that you'll see if you're interested in taking a look at it. Really comprehensive. We presented it to the Division of Family Practice AGM. That was at the end of September. People had about a month ahead of time where they had received the report and had time to look at it. But of course, it's a pretty big report, and kind of, there's this change management piece that it's hard to have people sort of wrap their minds around working in a different way, even though they know that they're not satisfied with the way that they are currently working. We also had a big change come to our site, which was moving to electronic medical record at the end of September. So we kind of piggybacked on some of the physician engagement events that were happening in the lead up to that. And we tried to reach out to physicians and had these printed out, laminated, the chart that you just saw, and we were trying to talk to people about it. Nevertheless, at the AGM, we felt that people were still not very sure of what the model actually meant. And so we ended up, even though we wanted to have sort of let's get to some consensus of whether we want to go ahead with this model, we wanted to have that kind of conversation, but it ended up being a lot of just informing people about the model. So we're at this stage right now where we feel a bit stalled. We haven't felt anyone shifting into wanting to adopt this model yet. What we're trying to do now is go back to kind of specific clinic to clinic, a little bit of a traveling roadshow where the steering group will go into clinic call group meetings and try to get more on the ground engagement and see whether call groups are willing to shift to this model. At the same time, from the health authority, there's a few sort of parallel streams of ideas happening which can support this model. I was alluding in the chat to the COVID inpatient funding. So we've heard that we could potentially access another chunk of COVID inpatient funding if we could somehow demonstrate that this supports acute care access and flow in the hospital. So we're working on a proposal to support the admissions and sort of / discharge doctor with extra stipend funding. And on a parallel track, also really preliminary discussions, but trying to see whether we could support having an NP who could come in and support the long-term awaiting long-term care patients. Yeah, it's a tricky thing, and I would say from sort of distilling what I'm hearing from all the groups here, I feel like what's really critical is the culture of the community. Like I hear that when you guys are talking Penticton about how you've been able to sort of stipulate some of these like requirements, or even like Annette, when you're talking from Sunshine Coast about people being expected to do at least one of these work, the buckets of work that's required in a hospital. Like I feel like that's so key, because what I feel like will really tear everything apart is once physicians don't feel part of a community anymore, and then everyone's just sort of going off and doing what's best for them, but not really looking at what the community needs. So I feel like that's a big challenge right now, is to try to see, we have this funding from the GPSC that's tied to certain things. We have the option of accessing some funds from the health authority, but it can't be in a way that is seen to be double dipping and supporting the same work. So it has to be sort of a different bucket of work. And then we also need to have the funding accessible to everyone, so that it's not exacerbating any kind of like, oh, that group is getting better paid than I am, and exacerbating sort of divisions that we're already feeling between the folks who are doing attached care and unattached care. And how do we do that in a way also that supports primary care, because we don't want to create a model. And I really appreciated one of the earlier presentations when you had the metric of how many physicians left community care, 0, which is great, because that's a fear that we have, that if we brought a hospitalist system to our community, then we'd have physicians kind of pulling out of primary care to do more sort of a workload that's more predictable and is consistently remunerated. So these are sort of the challenges that we're struggling with. And as you can tell, we haven't really landed, and we haven't kind of brought our community along to consensus yet, but we're in the middle of doing that.
I just add one more thing about MSP billing. For the unattached inpatient team, we do pool our billing and reuse the same billing service, Island Medcom, that the hospitalist groups use. And we track the returns on billing. And I think we get close to 90%, but it takes 3 to 6 months to get that. And I've thought for a while that we should get organized and send a bill to the Ministry of Health for all the wasted MSP premiums, and a bill for our time and administrative efforts on that. Like, I do frankly think it's ridiculous that our work in the hospital is devalued compared to specialist work. And I don't know if there's any movements afoot, but I'm thinking this is something that perhaps we could ask our MSA leaderships to help with and really look into. And I've got to think someone's got the right connection somewhere with accounting means and whatever to really produce some data. Because we've tried to look at, what does a hospitalist get paid, and how can we make the pay equivalent? Or ideally, if you're doing primary care plus hospital medicine, it should pay a little bit better than either, because it is the most challenging and I think, frankly, the most important work. And if we can figure out a way to make that manageable for the family doctors who want to do it, I think that's the best care model we could have. But anyway, if anyone's got ideas about what we could do about the MSP situation, obviously the BC family doctors are up to something, and I'm hoping that we're the next stop on the gravy train with them. But it is frustrating to watch this. And then there's also the variation in billing, right? Some doctors are really good at maximizing their billings, others aren't, and I don't think that's really fair to those who don't have that skill set. So anyway.
Thanks, Graham, and thanks, Maki. I'm just looking at time. We have like 4 minutes left. I think we probably have time for 2 general questions, or questions that you weren't able to ask and you still have outstanding. Is there anybody who wants to ask one of the presenters anything? Okay, well, that's great. And thanks. Sorry. Yeah.
It's Rachel Bell at Cathat Hospital in Pearl River District. I just wanted to say, I think that this has been incredibly enlightening and collaborative, and I am really so excited about this, not just from an inpatient model of care perspective, but around collaborating and learning from our partners in other health authorities. We really need to do more of this. So thank you everyone who's participated. Super helpful, very exciting.
Thanks, Rachel. And Chris, you have a question?
No, I think it was partially answered. Thanks. I'm in Powell River as well, but just really curious, aside from ALC, if anyone's using nurse practitioners in this role, or is looking towards having NPs support this.
We'd like to. We've looked through a primary care network to have NPs privileged in the hospital, but it's tricky. There's a course they have to do out of Ontario to be qualified, and there's just the workforce shortage there. So I think we've got most of the administrative hurdles cleared, but the demand right now is in community for NPs. So we're having a hard time locally with that.
We have in Penticton for nurse practitioners that have practices that do participate in their group rounds. They're not part of our CIS team, but they do their own inpatient care and work as part of a GP group.
Okay, that's really interesting. Thanks. I did just quickly Google and I noticed Fraser was actually advertising for another PATH unit for an NP on that position. So I guess it's happening. It's just really variable. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thanks. And Mark.
Oh, I just wanted to say that I was just, and I expect that everyone's going to be hearing about this soon if you haven't already, but it looks like the college is moving towards licensing associate physicians. And I've just been in a working group in our health authority, just trying to put some parameters around where we would want to put associate physicians. And one area that's of interest is in supporting inpatient care. So these would be people who are not able to get licensed to work in BC, but who are trained usually elsewhere, and that could work in a team-based care environment with supervision. So I feel like this is something that's going to change the landscape in the next few years.
Thanks for adding that information, Maki. So left is now just to say thank you everybody for coming and sharing all your wonderful work with us. As I mentioned before, we will post the recording on our website, and we will also make a written summary. I will probably touch base with some of you to make sure we have the information correctly. And we will definitely keep you all abreast of what we're doing in Powell River, so that hopefully we can pay you back in some way with what we're doing, because we definitely are building it on all the work you've already done. So thank you so much for coming, and I'm pretty sure our paths will cross again. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks for inviting us, Christiane.
Thank you for having us.